Welcome back. Welcome back. Thanks for joining me again, and Zande and Kim. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to continue the reading of There's Something You Should Know About Leroy. There's something you should know about Leroy, and you need to stick around and find out what is it that you need to know about Leroy. So I'm continuing from chapter 9. Leroy turned on the tap full force because he wanted to fill a bucket and take it out to the balcony, where a canvas was mounted on a large easel. Today he was using water paints. He was in that mood. The water plunged into the bucket, and with it a barrage of sediment that looked like soot but had the consistency of charcoal. "What the hell?" shouted Leroy. The man from the water company had explained to him long ago that this was manganese. "It comes out when we flush the old pipes," the man had said. "Quite harmless, more a nuisance than a threat, very safe to drink once you let it settle." Leroy had come to consider the phenomenon as part and parcel of Portmore life. If you allowed the water to stand still, the manganese would settle to the bottom and the top portion would be crystal clear. You simply poured it into another container and discarded the rest. You could do that for drinking, but if you didn't mind the slightly metallic taste, but washing posed a problem. You didn't know just when the particles of manganese would come floating out, and if you had just happened to be rinsing at the time, your clothes could become streaked and had to be washed a second time. Major bother. Sometimes the manganese would accumulate in the bathtubs and make it appear as if he had poor housekeeping skills, which he certainly did not. He was impeccable. But this manganese thing was becoming a real sore. Leroy waited for the manganese to settle and poured it into another bucket. Someone knocked at the door. "Oh, the computer guy," Leroy thought to himself. He had forgotten that the technician was coming. His PC had been having hiccups. Leroy opened the door to let in the uniformed man, explained what the problem was, then left the man to go do his job and resumed his own work on the balcony. He was working on a piece that he was planning to call Ruins. Just as well, Prudence would have said. Leroy chuckled. Prudence was always making fun of his abstracts. She didn't have the patience to study them. She liked art that told her exactly what it was. No hide and seek. She hated anonymity and ambiguity. "Tell me what you are so I can know how best to deal with you," was her philosophy. She liked a good portrait that was direct and to the point. She enjoyed a realistic landscape with rivers and mountains and trees in exactly the places they should be. She appreciated even still lifes of modest, three-dimensional objects, long as they looked like what they were supposed to look like. That was the deal. Leroy's art spoke to her in twisted ways. It intimidated her. It was too open to interpretation and therefore cowardly. Make a clear and precise statement so that, if need be, you can stand by it. Anything too ambiguous became elusive and evasive. She felt that art should be the exact opposite: bold, confrontational, and declarative. "Your motherboard is whacked. Might need to replace your hard drive," said the technician, in the tone of an oncologist giving his patient the grim prognosis. "Have you backed up your files? I can't guarantee that I'll save them all." The technician stepped out of the living room and walked onto the balcony. He reckoned he had been there enough times to do so without impunity. 4 times he had been to this house to work on this computer. He and Leroy were practically brothers, so to speak, in his mind at least. "What you working on today?" he asked. Leroy never liked for anyone to ask him what he was working on. First, it interfered with his concentration. Second, he never explained his work. Third, they weren't likely to make sense of it anyway. Only a handful of people were. I have too many files to back them all up. Can't you just transfer them? Can't promise, but I'll try. Meantime, back up what you can. I'll come back later to pick up the computer and work on it for you. By tomorrow evening, it will be up and running. Leroy figured that was that then, but the technician didn't seem to be making his way out. He stood admiring the work. Leroy was so accustomed to people telling him that they could not make sense of his work that he had grown to accept that no one really would, especially if they were not the artsy type who lived and worked around that kind of thing. This technician did not look the artsy type. Maybe he just had time to kill. Maybe he had seen one too many computers today. Leroy himself had no patience with computers. As soon as they started malfunctioning, he wanted to toss them away. If he could have afforded to do so, he probably would. Things like people should do what they say they are going to do. He kept up the basic maintenance of the computer, kept it impeccably clean and free of lint and dust, did not eat or drink around it, and followed all the little recommendations that the technician had made. But 6 times out of 10, the computer did not do what it was supposed to do. Man over machine every time, swore Leroy. You're left-handed, remarked the technician, as if pleased by the sudden observation. Leroy examined his hands. He had forgotten that he was left-handed. So many other things to remember in this world. One tends to overlook the obvious. You've never seen a left-handed person? He had meant to keep a straight face, but he laughed at his own joke. It's weird, seeing you paint like that, holding the brush like that. I've never seen an artist at work before. Come to think of it, most of the artists I work with are left-handed, said Leroy. It hadn't occurred to him before. I guess it's an art thing. I'm a little artistic myself, mainly sketch animals. From I was little, it's all I've loved to draw. But I couldn't do art full-time like you guys, though. I have bills to pay. Leroy chuckled. So like I said, I'll swing by tomorrow to pick up the computer. Use the time to back up your important files, because I can't promise anything. It's a very old computer. Don't remind me, muttered Leroy. Next time it breaks down, I might just as well get a new one. He was alone again. The painting wasn't going as he had hoped. He might have to take it indoors. He did his very best work indoors, sealed in tightly from the rest of the world, like an incubation, even at the risk of suffocation from the pungent fumes of the oil paints. At least, the inspiration was locked in and couldn't dissipate. He would endure the fumes. Sometimes he spent days locked inside working on a painting. He would often forget to eat and bathe, even use the toilet. 5 days later, he emerged like an emaciated mole, squinting in the sunlight, coughing and emitting a very antisocial odor. But it was all worth it because he was always pleased with the works produced during those hibernations. He moved the easel, canvases, and paints indoors, along with the sheets of newspaper strewn on the ground to protect the tiles. There was a clearing in the middle of the living room to accommodate just this type of procedure. To the sides of the walls, everything was spick and span, reflecting care and diligent cleaning. Everything was in its place. Drawers were closed, curtains were ironed. The couch was wrapped in thick, transparent plastic to protect it from dust. There was not a mark on the wall, not a stain on the floor, not a crumb in the corner. In the center of the room, there was chaos. Newspapers were scattered and blotched with paint. Paintbrushes dripped with paint of every conceivable color. The palette was a myriad of hues where he had tried as many combinations as he could think of, rejected some, and cherished others. Good art requires a certain amount of chaos, as with good music, Prudence had said, more in her own defense than his, because her own room would warrant a search from the health department. And in the middle of the chaos was the portrait of the artist in his underpants, stooped in front of the easel, clean and composed, not a trace of paint even on his fingertips. He held the brush with such finesse, so expertly. The transfer had been between the brush and the canvas. The artist remained untouched. The message was relayed from the source to the receiver, and the courier was none the wiser. End of chapter 9. So now I begin chapter 10. Typical male double standards, pouted Marva. She wasn't so much angry as she was annoyed. You're okay with the other women doing it. Why not me? I just don't want my woman sitting naked in front of so many men. That's all, said Wayne. He knew that wasn't all. Marva would not let it be all. Prudence does it. You don't have a problem with Prudence doing it. Prudence is Prudence. You are you. What's that supposed to mean? It means no, I'm not letting you pose nude. You're not letting me? Just who do you think you are? Why did you come to ask me then if my position doesn't count? No means no, and I'm saying no. She folded her arms in protest, like a spoiled teenager who couldn't have her way. She tried another strategy. So, does your friend Prudence know that you feel this way about what she does, but you couldn't tell her to her face? Feel what way? Tell her what? You don't mind her doing it, but you mind me doing it. Is she worth more than me or less than me? Above or below? Oh, I get it. Wayne raised his eyebrows. What did she get? He braced for it. Oh, so because Prudence is slim and trim, she can show her naked ass, but I'm too fat, right? You think people will laugh at me and say I'm too fat? She came closer to him so she could look him square in the face. Are you ashamed of my weight? So, I'm good enough for you to contort in all kinds of positions in the privacy of your room, but not good enough to be put on exhibition like Prudence. I'm trying to preserve your modesty and you think I'm ashamed of you? Where did this great new idea spring from anyway? All of a sudden you want to strip off your clothes and have people do your portrait. Maybe it's you who have an issue with your weight. What are you trying to prove? To prove that I am just as beautiful as any skinny girl. Why do you have to take off your clothes to prove that? You don't have an issue with Prudence doing it. Why me? Leave Prudence out of this. Marva walked over to the mirror. She was wearing her brassiere and underwear. They had been getting ready to have a shower together, like they always did. She used her thumb and index finger to pinch a sizable portion of fat at her side, continuing the process all along her belly and back, pinching, releasing, and sighing. The subcutaneous fat shook like jelly each time it was released. She examined her buttocks. Cellulite City. She made a fist and examined her arms. 4 times more fat than muscle, she was sure. She examined her neck, rather her necks. She had 2 adults and a baby. Wayne, why didn't you just tell me I needed to lose some weight? I thought you liked me this way. You don't need to lose any weight. I love you just like this. Then, how come you don't want anyone else to see me? He sighed and walked over to her, pulling her close. Listen, I'll do the nude portrait of you, but I can't put it in exhibition. I don't want other men lusting after my woman. I'll keep it at home so the two of us can look at it, okay? Okay. Several days had passed and Prudence was wondering whether to explore the situation or let it be. Did she even have a right to stir up that particular ant's nest? Was she just being her old mischievous self? What exactly did she hope to achieve? Are you sure, Prue? Asked Leroy. Look, Lee, all we're going to do is walk over and say good morning and make up some cock and bull story as to why we're there. And you will see for yourself. It's her same one. They made their way down the crooked staircase, down the corridor, down the pavement, into the administrative office. Mrs. Hyacinth Blake was on her way out. They had come in the nick of time. Mrs. Blake, Prudence started, forgetting her lines. Typical music student, someone from drama would have sneered. Never forget your lines. Mrs. Blake used one firm hand to force them both through the door and onto the pavement. What do you think you're doing? She asked. I didn't mean for it to come out that way. You caught us by surprise, explained Prudence. I caught you by surprise? Mrs. Blake spoke in a hushed voice. Listen. Yeah, I recognized you from the other day with Mr. Willis. It's a small world. But don't make any trouble for me. It's not necessary. Woman to woman. We don't plan to make any trouble, said Prudence. Then, why did you come down here and bring your friend who hardly even talks? A tint of honeysuckle returned to her voice, and a very slight wave moved through her body. She almost stroked Leroy's chest with her fingertips. Listen, what I do at night is my business. My day job is my day job. And I have kids to protect, okay? So don't stir up any trouble. I have friends in high places. Like I said, we didn't plan to cause any trouble. I just wanted Leroy to confirm my suspicion. Mrs. Blake chuckled. Oh, so it's Leroy. I finally know your name. She usually had her rolls down pat. But with these two, she shape-shifted back and forth as if to say, they already know what the heck. Okay, so run along then and let sleeping dogs lie. Prudence and Leroy turned and walked back down the corridor, conscious of being watched, as though they were the ones leading double lives. They felt Honeysuckle's eyes piercing their backs. Or was it Mrs. Blake's? They wanted to run. I can't believe that woman, Prudence said when they were finally in the studio. You better believe it, said Leroy cynically. It's the way of the world. What you see is not what is. What is not what you see. A bit of a poet today, are you, Lee? I don't plan to tell anyone else, but it just makes me wonder. How many well-shaved, well-dressed people that we meet and interact with every day are leading double lives, crawling out at midnight when the other side of them comes alive. We'll never know the half of it. And she's married too and very rich, I hear. Her husband is a doctor. So she of all people should know better then. Such a risky thing she's doing at night and putting him at risk too. I bet he feels so safe within himself, being a doctor and knowing what he knows. Why does she do it? I don't get it. Don't burst your brain trying to figure it out, Prue. People are people. Marva was very proud of the pose she had chosen. She was looking dead center into the eyes of the artist. She was an artist herself. She knew what the artist wanted. She had powdered her face and applied modest makeup with which highlighted her features. An off-white set of pearls dangled from her neck and she wore matching pearl earrings. That was all she had on. She lay in her own bed on red satin sheets. She was almost spread-eagled except that one knee was slightly raised for contrast. Her eyes were inviting, daring, Wayne sat at the foot of the bed and sketched her portrait on the largest sheet of sketchpad he could find, as a way of appeasing her. His charcoal pencil did justice to the curvaceous outline of the woman, added shades and highlights where they were needed. He was becoming aroused. The session lasted for half an hour, and as soon as the portrait was done, he crawled up onto the bed and made love to her feverishly. Marva couldn't wait to see it. He fell asleep immediately afterwards, and she crawled from the bed, anxious, anticipating. "What the frig?" she screamed. "Wayne, what the hell?" He jumped from his sleep, confused and still aroused. "You cut off my head. Why on earth would you sketch my body and leave off my head? You jerk!" She wanted to cry. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11. The men had just finished fogging the scheme. The air was still thick and heavy with the smell. Whenever they came by, the residents weren't sure whether to stay inside or out. Both options seemed equally precarious. Most opted to stay indoors and ride it out till the coast was clear, just like the mosquitoes did. Some made a dramatic moment out of it, covering their noses and mouths with damp towels, especially if they suffered from allergies, which most of them did. The asthmatic children, who seemed to be in the majority, were huddled together and watched like specimens in a petri dish, watched for the first symptoms of labored breathing. Their bronchodilators and health cards were kept handy in case a trip to the doctor's office proved necessary. Nightlife in Portmore boiled down to a battle between man and mosquitoes. The mosquitoes always won, of course, but the men put up a commendable fight. The fogging was effective mainly against those mosquitoes who had not been quick enough to bolt inside before the doors and windows were closed. The mosquitoes who knew the ropes hid under the beds, tables, and chests of drawers, behind curtains, and in cupboards. Some, mad with the urgency of escape, had flown into places that they would not have done otherwise, such as when someone opened the refrigerator door and suffered an untimely death. But most survived and were out and about next evening, comparing tales. They gathered in swarms of hundreds, literally hundreds, and hovered over gullies, swales, hedges, and the heads of people who sat on the bridge. "At least we have some peace tonight, but God, that smell," said Prudence. Everyone nodded in agreement. "What's Shy doing in the bar?" asked Primrose. Everyone's head turned in the direction of the bar. "We don't sell soft drinks, only hard liquor," said the barmaid. She was very plump, and her clothes were 3 sizes too small. Her hair extension kept falling over onto her breast and giving her a hard time with the cocktail she was trying to make. She pretended to be annoyed, but she liked her hair extension. It had cost her 2 weeks' wages. She was generally in a foul mood, but this young girl had revved her up a notch. Who comes into a bar and asks for soft drinks? What did she take this place for? "Try one of the corner shops." She tried to make her voice pleasant, but she was clearly peeved. She shook her head, pitying Cheyenne's simplicity. "Only hard liquor, cigarettes, wine, that kind of stuff we sell." "And condoms," shouted one of the 3 men who were seated around the counter. He was sipping a transparent liquid from a glass. It wasn't water. People in a bar didn't sip water with such relish. Another man was standing in front of the jukebox, rocking to the beat of the dancehall song he had requested. He had been eyeing Cheyenne from the minute she had walked in, and every now and then he glanced over at her as she leaned against the counter. She was slim, but had very pronounced breasts and a shapely figure. "Just my size. You new here?" He seemed to confirm rather than ask, as if to imply, "I don't know you, so you must be new." Leave the child alone, Pauline reprimanded him, flicking a few strands of weave from her face and loving every minute of it. She hoped the girl would take the hint and leave the bar soon. She had seen enough young girls fall prey to the loathsome predators who stalked these parts. Pauline herself had been such a victim, once when she could still lay claim to innocence. She got caught, as so many do, gobbled up and spat out, her remains oozing from the saliva, with the saliva of the beast. It was downhill from there. At least in her mind, there seemed to be no other way but down, after being drugged and raped in every orifice, after a night at the dance, against her mother's orders, as it so often is. That one episode had been enough to make her numb. So now, she thought nothing of serving round upon round of alcohol to raucous men who grabbed at her bosom and her crotch, day after day, rolling back their heads and mocking her to her face. Sometimes they were so drunk and rank that their spit dribbled from their mouths, their sentences dragged into incoherence, and they could barely stand still. They could barely stand. Still, she thought nothing of leading them into the tiny bathroom in the quad, often holding their hands like one does a wayward child. And she let them have their way with her. Whatever they wanted, however they wanted it, for a price she set because they were too drunk to negotiate, too ravenous to object. 10 minutes later, she was back pouring white rum or tonic wine, or flicking her weave out of her face. You didn't hear what I said? No soft drinks. Try Miss Carla's shop, said Pauline, almost desperate for the girl to leave. I heard you. You sell bottled water then? Hey, Pauline, leany, sang the man who had been in front of the jukebox, moving over to lean against the counter where he could get a more direct view of Cheyenne, size up the victim before its dive. Pauline, my friend, pass me a bottle of Big Bull. Look like I'm gonna need some extra strength this evening. This little Indian thing look like she might have some white liver. He glanced seductively at Cheyenne, scanning her from head to toe. He fancied himself a Casanova. You have Indian blood in you, darling. I know you have some white blood in you somewhere. You mix with Chinese or something? Yes, I'm mixed, said Cheyenne, her eyes tilted down. He leaned his head closely into her face, his breath heavy with liquor. He wasn't an ugly fella. In fact, Benz prided himself on being quite the charmer, a ladies' man. He got his name from the car he hoped one day to drive, by hook or crook, or by one day winning the millions that lay beneath the delicate flakes of a scratch card. He was always first and last in the long line that formed every day at the Lucky Pot outlet by the shopping center. He considered himself luckier than most. Many times he had gotten some very good dreams and missed the numbers by this much, slight miscalculation, but he was zeroing in on the science of this thing. His clothes were worn but stylish. He worked at odd jobs, mainly in construction, and only when absolutely necessary. Sometimes he had loads of cash, sometimes none at all. Benz, leave the girl alone, is Miss Maud's daughter, warned Pauline. Is grudge a grudge? You see me troubling anybody, Pauline? I'm simply having a chat with this nice Indian girl. He played with Cheyenne's fingers, which were resting on the counter. She pulled them away slowly, shyly. Inspector Lloyd walked into the bar. Benz hadn't heard the policeman's car pull up. He chastised himself inwardly as he pulled his hands away from Cheyenne's fingers. He had a special ear for police vehicles, a skill he had honed. But this time, he had been too distracted by the slim, beautiful girl who had strolled into the bar to order soft drinks, the way you would order a chocolate sundae from an ice cream parlor. Inspector Lloyd had caught him off guard. Luckily, he had no weed on him today. Inspector Lloyd walked in with his usual air of authority. This time, as with other times, he had a strong suspicion that he had just intercepted a crime. His instincts were that sharp. He recognized the young girl right away. He scanned the scene, immediately assigning roles to the victim, villain, and the complicit bystanders. Like a superhero swooping down in the nick of time, he ushered the young maiden out of harm's way and promptly returned to have a word with the prime antagonist. "Mind if I check those pockets?" he stated rather than asked, for while he said it, the search was already underway. "Officer, you know I'm clean, a clean, hard-working man," said Benz good-humoredly, his hands held high above his head and his feet spread. "Just having a few beers before going home to the wife and kids." "Routine procedure," explained Inspector Lloyd, but he was disappointed. The SWAT operation had turned up nothing, except that a potential hostage had been rescued, and so once again the day was saved. But still, "Might as well have a flask if I'm here," said the inspector, pulling up his regular seat. Everyone knew that he drank every time he stopped in at the bar. As far as he was concerned, he was on a reconnaissance, and having a drink was a way of blending in, rubbing shoulders with the civilians so as to encourage them to open up. He was acting above and beyond the call of duty. He chatted up to Pauline like they were bosom pals. Barmaids were some of the best people to have in your corner. They had the vilest and lowest outlaws whispering in their ears, often in a drunken monologue, the best kind. When the tongue got heavy, the brain got light, and outlaws implicated themselves, like their cronies, their mothers, siblings, and cousins twice removed. So even in his sharp, spotless uniform, Inspector Lloyd accepted that there were benefits to mingling among the scum. He maintained his stern composure and kept an air of seriousness around him as he sipped some good Jamaican rum. "You letting minors into the bar now, Pauline?" "No, Constable. I told her to leave long ago. I don't serve youngsters." Shy, don't do that again. Pure riffraff over that place," said Primrose. "Come, let me follow you to the shop." "It's okay," Cheyenne said. She climbed up onto the bridge among the others. "I'll wait till I go inside. I'm not so thirsty anymore." Shy, we're gonna have to teach you the ropes," everyone agreed. "Country girl wouldn't last a day with these thugs." Cheyenne smiled. She sat on the bridge with legs crossed. She was wearing blue denim jeans and a girly pink t-shirt, the pattern of hearts still visible even as twilight descended. Her ears had been pierced, but she wasn't wearing earrings. Her hair was pulled back into one bundle and held together by a thick elastic band. It tumbled down across her back and was tossed to the front each time she leaned forward. "What you gonna do about school, Shy?" asked Prudence. Cheyenne said she wasn't sure, couldn't think about that right now. They understood. She had been through a lot. "I have to sort things out with my father. I can't even think straight right now." "You're obviously not thinking straight if you walk into that bar. They have sex in the bathroom over there," Freddie put out, and everyone turned to him in shock. "Freddie, shut your mouth. How you know about that?" Prudence made akimbo and glared at her brother, who was clearly exposed to too much for his own good. He looked away. He realized he had said too much and couldn't retract. The powerful smell from the fogging had just about faded. The asthmatics were on their way to recovery. The mosquitoes were covering their mouths and giggling, slapping their skinny legs and telling stories of narrow escapes. It had gotten very dark, and the street lights were all on. One by one, the unofficial members of Portmore's underbelly were slowly shaking off the reverie of their daytime slumber and were emerging to claim the streets. They were nocturnal. They came out when others sought refuge on the inside for the same reason. They were the reason. They were the ones who surveyed the scheme, checking the length of the chain for the weakest links, tugging and prying to come back later. They knew which cars to steal and which cars to let alone. The car insurance rates for Portmore dwellers were many times higher than for those who lived even in the capital city. Portmore vehicles were that more vulnerable to theft. It seemed not to matter that many of these vehicles were heavily fortified, with steering locks and alarms that went off every time a dog strutted by. They knew which houses were vacant, which occupants had gone abroad or were on vacation. They knew which houses contained strong, defiant men who wouldn't go down without a fight, which houses had weak, wimpy men who posed no threats, which houses had no men at all. The latter were in the majority. They knew which houses were grilled and which were not, who stayed out late and who locked up early, which neighbors were vigilant and which ones seemed not to be aware of their vulnerability.